Welcome to yet another faculty mentoring faculty presentation. On behalf of Andy Jones, who's currently down in San Francisco at a writing conference, I'd like to express my thanks, my gratitude for your coming today. My name is Wyndham McConnell. I'm director of the Teaching Resources Center. Currently, shall we say, doing some reflecting as to whether we should change our name to Center for Teaching Excellence or the Center for Excellence in Teaching. But there will be a change, I think, to try to get away from sometimes the impression that some people have of a teaching resources center as a place where you get mechanical equipment, help with perhaps a media that's gone on the blink and so on and so forth. Well, we've had in virtually all the presentations so far, I would say, colleagues showing their skills at how they present their material in classes, the difficulties they run up against, but the advantages to a particular method and so on. Today the focus is on something a bit different, and that is how do you train others to present those things in classes. I'd like to introduce my colleague Carlee Arnett, an associate professor of German in the department, who's been with us now I think for 10 years, or will have been at the end of this year. A former director, 5-year director of the Center, the Second Language Acquisition Institute on the campus, and currently supervisor of TAs and coordinator of the language program in German, but also supervising the basic language programs in Hindi, Arabic, and Hebrew. She is an expert on cognitive grammar in her own work in second language acquisition, but I should also mention too her range of interests is fairly wide, including Old Saxon and right up to modern German syntax. She is in particular interested now in TA training in content-based instruction, and has for the past 4 years been supervising teaching assistants in the designing, the developing, and the delivering of their own courses. The focus in her talk will be on benefits for students and TAs of such a course. I'd like to call it Pearls and Perils for TAs and their supervisors. So without further ado, Carlee, thank you.
Most people I know, but actually if I don't know you, if you could just tell me the discipline that you're from so that I can phrase things in a way that might be meaningful rather than if they're not teaching content at other levels, what are they doing, so you don't wonder that for the duration of the talk. You're biology, right? Okay. And you're from?
I'm from the Teaching Resources Center, but my background's in ecology.
Okay. And
I'm the selector for Arabic, Hindi, Urdu, and Hebrew and Russian over at Shields.
okay. And your name is?
Adam Siegel, I'm sorry.
Okay. Good. And you, sir?
Mike Winter. I'm the for among other things, I selected French and German at Shields, comparative lit, if you were just
Okay. Somebody I should know. All right, I want to start off with a brief and inadequate history of content-based instruction in the language classroom. For us in the languages, content-based means the 4th semester of the course. So for us, the last quarter of the year. And this came about because programs felt that they lacked articulation between their 1st and 2nd year language programs and then upper division teaching, which were content-based, where they taught in the target language and focused on the subject matter, but not on teaching language skills. And this still exists many places where it's 2 years of the language program or 1, and then they go into upper division doing their major, and there's still a bit of a disconnect. In our faculty, actually, there's not. We all understand that it's language teaching all the way through and it's content all the way down. But this is what came about in the field that brought people to thinking this was a good idea. Yeah.
Can you just tell us again what the difference between content and language teaching is?
I was about to come to
Oh,
that,
okay.
but feel free to interrupt any time, especially when you have a question like that, because that was one I really anticipated that I didn't want people to wonder about. The idea was, or what happened in the past, is that in the first 2 years of the first year, you learned forms. So if you think of opening any language textbook, for German, every time you learn the reflexive, that will be chapter 8. The adjective endings will be chapter 10. The modal verbs will be chapter 4. And I can open any book written in 1950 or written in 2009, and this will be true. It doesn't reflect the order of acquisition of certain structures by students or by L1 learners, so people learning the language natively at home. It reflects our idea of how this grammar-driven syllabus should work based on I'm not sure what. So the idea is that you're just skill getting in the first 2 years, and then you're applying those skills or using them in years 3 and 4. What this, of course, leads to is students in the first and second year going, I have to put up with 2 years before I can actually get to learning anything. I'm frustrated. The instructor, hopefully, going, I'm here teaching nothing, and that's not working for 50 minutes a day, 5 days a week for me. I've got to have content. So that's how content gets into the first 2 years of language instruction, because I don't think anybody in pick your field X, thinks that I'm just going to not teach content while I teach them the basic. This is just not a good compatible way. Content-based instruction also came from immersion programs, primarily in Canada, where they're teaching in the target language all the way through from the first grade to the 12th grade. They're teaching their content. And then the question comes, how do you make students aware of the language issues that they're having? Because you might correct something or model the correct response, and they'll go, yes, that's what I said, because they're focusing on content. So how do you get the language component into these higher levels of language? And then this is, in the language world, seen as a way to bridge this. In the literature on how to train TAs to teach the second year, there's lots of literature on how to train them to teach the first year. Many institutions, we are one, we have a required methods course for all TAs who come in and teach language. We have a pre-session workshop. I hold weekly coordination meetings for the sections that we teach. And that's the way lots of programs do it. But then they go off to teach the second year, and the bottom drops out. And teaching the second year is a different beast. You can't just go in and use your first year skills and teach the second year. So some of the suggestions that come out of the literature are assign TAs a faculty mentor, so that person who presumably has taught quite a bit at the second year can train that individual to do the second year. Require a second methods course. That's a fantastic idea. Yes?
So when you talk of these TAs have no idea what they're doing, isn't there a course instructor who work with the TAs? And most of us who have TAs, we spend a good amount of time with the TAs before they ever walk in front of the students.
We do that for the first year. I mean, I personally do that for the second year as well. And many programs here at Davis do. But I'm actually was kind of talking about the state of things at most universities.
But what I'm wondering is, why isn't that the standard all across everybody who teaches?
Okay, I will get to that, why we get to my particular problem vis-a-vis other things. So you can assign a faculty member as a mentor. The problem with that is not every faculty mentor or member is trained or willing to help somebody teach the second year. Require a second methods course. Boy, we would absolutely love to. But we had a hard enough time, and I'm talking years, at this institution who's highly committed to this, to get our first methods course and actually have it count for the students. What you have is people saying, well, this takes one course away from what they could be learning in Comp Lit or what they could be learning in literature. We don't value this. This is a professionalization course. There's no theory behind this. And we're not going to give up a second course in six quarters to devote to TA training. So people may have these that students can take, but it's voluntary, not mandatory. So what you have is an overworked language coordinator working with, at most institutions, working with TAs in the second year on an as-needed basis, which again is not ideal. Some institutions have the luxury of having one coordinator for the first year and one for the second year. But I have a pretty cushy deal, and I've got 5 languages and 23 separate sections, plus my own teaching. But I have a well-oiled machine of how I intervene when we meet TAs helping other TAs. This can work. So one of the solutions that was presented is to have them do a 4th semester content course that would be mentored by the language coordinator. And that's something that, since TAs teach at that level, it costs nothing to implement, whereas these other things, not on the as-needed basis, but the seconds methods course or assigning a faculty member, have costs, maybe not a dollar amount, but costs that the institutions are mostly not willing to commit. So the question is, why can't the TAs just do what they did in the first year in the second year? Which may not be a question for any one of you, because everybody's shaking their heads going, well, of course it's a different beast. But this is what we see out of, I had done for another paper a review of the literature. This is what we see coming out of the literature, and this is what I notice. 150 hours in the first year and completion of the first year textbook does not mean that students know all that they were taught. And everybody giggled here, and this is an incredible stumbling point for us in our discipline. Even after they've had the additional 50, not whatever it is, 75 hours that they get in the second year, because we meet 3 days a week, they still don't know many things. At the end of first year German, I can be certain that they know the present tense, some past participles, the modal verbs, and they have good control of the accusative case. And that covers through chapter 4. So we actually cover that grammar at the end of German 1. Does it mean that they learned that grammar by the end of German 1? It means they learned that by the end of the first year. So forget passive, subjunctive, relative pronouns, adjective endings, and some of these things we know they're not even to acquire after they've had a year abroad. So some of these things we know will be with us the 4 years that we may have a student, assuming they start in German 1. And some of these things, even if we had them for 6 years or somebody else taught them German before, they're not going to acquire that either. Some of these take 10 to 15 years to lock down. And that's okay. And it's not just because German is hard. This is true in every language. They're going to have something that's just hard, or maybe some things. So not only do we have to remind the TAs that that is the case, especially when they start the second year and all of a sudden the students forget how to conjugate the 2 basic verbs, have and be. I expect that. So when they come in my door distraught, I say, I told you that would happen. I try not to say I told you so, because I did tell them, don't worry about this, it's going to happen. But it has to happen to them before they understand that. So they come in distraught, and I say, this is how I know acquisition is taking place, because this structure has broken down, because they're acquiring something else here. And 10 weeks from now, when they're in German 21, they'll have that. And it'll be solid, and they'll have it forever, and we're good. So this, and the students freak out too. I can't conjugate basic verbs. What am I doing? Should I drop the course? I need a tutor. And we need to be able to tell them, you're right on target. This is what we expect you're learning. So I think also reminding our faculty that just because they've had 2 years of instruction, they've supposedly been taught the grammar twice, doesn't mean that they know very much. And that's okay, because if you flip the coin and you say, wow, after 210 hours of instruction, they know quite a bit. I think it's remarkable what they know. In the first year, we use a holistic assessment of essays. So you look at this and you don't just say 2 points for every mistake, because in German it would be in the negative numbers, and it would defeat them. You look at this and you say, what's my ratio of error to complexity? Is it just, I play Nintendo? Evenings, I play Nintendo. Is it impoverished, which does not signal good writing, or is it complex and they're reaching at the level of their language, and that's how we assess the writing? In the second year, though, it's not holistic anymore. We're upping the ante and we're asking them to not just write about what they did on the weekend, but maybe make a reflection on a text, preparing them for the third year where they will be writing essays reflecting on pieces of literature. So it's an analytical scale, which means that we assign a certain number of points to 5 different categories. Those would be vocabulary, are they working at their level? And the flip side of that, not looking up everything in the dictionary and giving us direct translations of Campbell's soup or something, or nightclub, which, nightstick, and the things that they might come up with that entertain us. So for anyone who knows German, my personal favorite is Mangel an Lebensmittel, which came back as mangled in the middle of life. It should be a lack of food. So vocabulary, idiomaticity, so are they just writing a little American essay in German, which mostly they are, and we're okay with that, but are we getting direct translations of, are we getting a direct translation of in my opinion instead of according, my opinion according, the things that we should see in German? Mechanics. Is this the length we asked them to be? Did they leave 3/4 of the page to write their name? Is it in 14-point font? So we have to have a category for mechanics. Grammar, of course, is a category. That's where we then have a key where we go through all the errors and mark them, and then they self-correct. So everything is written and rewritten. In this type of context, obviously free writes or collaborative writing in class isn't necessarily done that, and I'm missing one. Content. Good point. Have they attended to the task in a meaningful way that we set out? And we're pretty flexible on that. Did they do a task that actually has meaning? So we're okay with that. So it's the evaluation of the essays, and of course the horror of the first essay that comes in, which then tells me, did they do their job in the first year and teach writing in German 1, 2, and 3? Because if they didn't, the second year we're gonna see that and start at a much lower level of writing in German 20. And I know at one point I was scheduled to teach 20 in the fall, and one of the first year TAs is like, we got to ramp up the writing and do this right, or she's going to notice it and we're all dead. And they did, and we had good writers. At the end of the second year, actually, our course, we assigned enough writing to meet the University General Education requirement for the GE writing requirement, which at one hand you might say, isn't that great how much they can do? Or you would say, maybe that requirement isn't strict enough for what the writing should be. Oral participation, again, the first year you can say a sentence or two and do your pattern drills and manipulate sentences, but now they actually have to talk about more content, and so it's ramping that up and giving them the structures that they need to talk about a text. And how to teach reading and writing skills. You can't just say, here's your text, read it for tomorrow. That would be a catastrophe. And then come in the class the next day and say, all right, student B, summarize the text. That is going to be incredibly ineffective. If that even worked in the first year, it's not what I would have asked them to do, but just let's say they got away with that. That's going to bomb to a screeching halt in the second year. So they would have to learn how to do pre-readings, brainstorming, activities that create meaning from the text, and then how the students will write about that. They might write a prequel to a text or a conclusion or put something in the middle. And then how are we going to test what we teach? In the first year, our tests are 60% listening, writing, reading, culture, everything else, and only 40% manipulate the form. And so usually in the second year, we go to quizzing grammar, so just in the quizzes, and that the tests are content-based. and getting a TA to be comfortable with that. It's weaning them away from the notion of grammar is everything. And since my research area of specialization happens to be grammar, and I think grammar is everything, I'm almost talking out of two sides of my mouth, but it seems to me that it needs to become obvious to the TAs and to everyone that you can't have culture or anything unless you have grammar. You can't even have a sentence unless you have grammar. Grammar is always there. We just take it for granted and get about teaching the things that they will remember and they will care about, because they will not care about whether the passive dative case remains in the passive. I care, they don't. So it's the role of grammar, because when TAs get nervous, they pull back to what they think they know, which is grammar. And that's nice and that's tidy, and we don't have to use too much language to talk about it. And we can have correct answers and incorrect answers, and why can't we test this on the tests? And they pull back. The use of technology. Yes, I encourage its use in the first year where we can, but certainly in the second year you open a whole new domain of what you can do. You can't just walk in and pop a film in and chat about it. You've got to didacticize all of that. You probably aren't going to run a whole film. We actually do in the second year, but you're not going to run a whole film. You're going to show clips. You're going to compare clips so that you're looking at the use of space or their attitude toward money or whatever it is you're getting at that day, or ramping up to World Cup soccer. It doesn't matter what they want to get into. It's all going to be a reflection of the culture. The use of chat, the use of Moodle. Again, I don't care where their particular interests lie or what they want to get up to, but they need to be getting up to something to teach themselves how to teach. The next thing is exam length. And I'll stare right here at our prime offender. Just kidding. She smiled. I write exams that tend to be too long. I am guilty as charged. It's a matter of guiding TAs to what they can do in 5 minutes, our students can do in 50. They get so excited about the content and wanting to ask lots and lots of questions and guide the students to thinking through the text that they've put on their test that the exams are too long. And I can tell them, cut your exam. Please don't write an exam that is too long. I tell them this from the get-go. They have to walk in, give an exam that is too long, come back in a panic, where then I say, I mentioned this, but without trying to say I told you so. And then what do we do about that? How do we grade it, given that there were time constraints? Are we going to give them more time? Everything can be handled when we grade it. Nothing is insurmountable. That's another thing that a TA, it's okay if you had a rotten question, we'll just toss it out. Nothing is insurmountable. Again, the role of grammar in reading and writing. So when to point out a grammatical structure in a text and when to leave it alone. Because the first thing students will see in any Kafka text is that he doesn't put the verbs where they spent the entire first year learning the verbs should go. And then you can tell them why and how that works, and talk about, if you weren't already talking about that in the first year, variation and flexibility. All right, Davis is not alone in its use of content-based instruction at the end of the second year. Some of these institutions use TAs and some of them do not. Some of them are more guided in their approach to having TAs teach the second year, and some of them are not. So where faculty do this, that's the College of Charleston, Mount Holyoke College. University of Arizona uses both TAs and faculty, which, as long as everyone is autonomous, that's great. Sometimes when you have a TA and a faculty member teaching a course, you get wonderful things out of that, but then you get other things where the TA may want to do certain things and the faculty member is not ready to do that, or whatever the issue might be. But those at this institution have always been fabulous partnerships. The University of Michigan uses TAs for this, so does Texas. Irvine uses TAs, but the package that's put together for the TAs to use is put together by everyone, and then everyone uses it, so that they use a reader, and it's not TAs selecting their own materials. It's much more guided than what I'm up to. topics that have been successful in the past, some at this institution, some not. When I came, we had a pre-prepared package that was handed down to me on a text called Perfume, if you've read that in English, where a guy goes out and kills 17 virgins to make perfume so that he smells wonderful and people will do what he wants because he doesn't have a scent. It's kind of a pastiche of German literature, so it would be better suited to kind of a senior capstone course than this level, but nonetheless. We had a TA take that and work through that. That author had written a play. He produced that play in our theater here, and he made that his own and did great things with that author. We had another TA do Momo. We currently have a course on the former East Germany, which you're not allowed to say in German. I don't know how I get around that and say that in English. So the German Democratic Republic. We had a course on Tristan and medieval things. We had Wagner and German operas, and that TA chose at the end of his course to make a film where he had one of his characters dressed as Groucho Marx with the horn. But the students were there, had cut down the opera into this, however many minutes the film was, and spoke it all in German and had set up their scenes and done spectacular things with this. We've also had minority voices in contemporary German. I put the family as if that was neutral, but since this is Germany, it's the dysfunctional family. And very popular German crime stories. That one always is a hit and always comes up and up and up again. The family goes in and out of popularity, so do these other things. The guidelines that I give the TAs that are pretty much non-negotiable, although they will come and try to negotiate. The first thing they try to negotiate is follow university guidelines for the syllabus. And I'm not sure why that gets negotiated. Because there's 8 things you have to have in your syllabus. Participation can only be up to 10%. There are rules about attendance, where we can use it and where we count it and where we can't. And you have to have homework, and you can't just assign 90% to your final exam, and other things that are really non-negotiable, but that's something the TA needs to work through. And of course, but here's my syllabus from Professor X, and I go, well, I don't supervise Professor X. And you have to use the target language, especially a TA won't even come to the table to be offered the opportunity to do this if they're not committed to teaching in the target language. So anyone who would say, well, I can't possibly teach whatever I want to teach in German is just not going to be a candidate for getting this opportunity. We do this in the target language, and that's that. The other criteria that I was given by my department, which may or may not still hold as a criteria, but I think it's good, is one longer work. You don't have to spend 10 weeks on one work, but you have to do a longer work so that they feel at the end of their 2 years that they actually read a novel, or they read something that mattered, that real Germans would pick up and read, and they did it too. So that's the perk for them. You have to have a midterm and a final, particularly a final. I'm not sure why TAs think that they can just not have a final and take off for Aruba, but we've got to have some sort of final exam. TAs like to get up to exciting things in that final exam, so since we've done web-based things, we can petition the dean to say our final will be here, there, and yonder, and you know, technically the course ends at that final exam time, but we don't have a problem getting students to sign off and say, look, our web-based final will be presented at the final, but we know we have to turn in our materials early so we can get it on the internet. Have to do 3 essays and rewrites so that there's, yeah?
There's so much writing, I'm just wondering, did we ever do an oral exam, like final exam, which would be oral?
You could. Nobody's done it yet, but it could be an oral presentation. People have done that. Yeah. 3 essays and rewrites, which then, oh my God, that's so much grading. Yes, it is. It's the 2nd year. It's about reading and writing, and writing the essay and having them rewrite it with our correction key shows the most bang for the buck of anything that we do in terms of their improvement. Benefits to learners. Increased articulation between the second and third year of coursework. What we're really running here is a upper division course in their last year, but with the scaffolding and support that both student and instructor need to make this kind of thing work. We often hear that this end of the second year course is harder than their upper division courses, because we do require more oral participation in graded categories and more writing sometimes that they see in upper division. The organizing principle is subject matter, focus on meaning, not form. So then the other component is how do we address the form issue, because they're still language learners, as we focus on the subject or the content. And that's a hard switch sometimes for TAs who would like to continue to focus on form.
A question. Why do you subordinate form to meaning there? Because as you said before, they don't command the grammar yet, and don't you want to sort of put those on a par with each other, meaning and form, and grade them somewhat equally in something like that?
You've got two questions. You asked about the grading, and we have the 5 categories for the analytical grading, and then content and grammar. So subject and form get equal grading. Why do I subordinate form here? Because we know that you can explicitly teach certain structures over and over and over again, and they won't acquire them. So that's not going to be a good use of class time. But you can trigger learning by teaching around these issues. It's going to, when you teach the dative case, that is what triggers the solidity in the accusative case. So even though they're not going to acquire the dative case until sometime beyond their existence on this campus, they will get the accusative because we've taught the dative. And because in their third year courses, it's going to be focused on content and not on form anymore. We need to teach them how to get the form, how to use a grammar independently and read through these materials to get the forms that they need without it being explicitly instructed in class, and give them meaningful instruction that they care about and continue wanting to learn German, rather than saying, this is the 5th time I'm studying participial adjectives, I still don't get it, and I don't care. One of the things that we also do at this level now in our writing is to ask them to use 5 relative clauses in your writing. And what they will do is actually not do that, but then they'll give us 5 extended modifiers, 5 equally complex or difficult somethings. And so we're grateful for that. But if we don't point out, do something, then they don't use any of these more complex structures that at least when in writing they can have the time to reflect and get these right and look it up and ask the TA for help, that they can have a crack at practicing. This accommodates their linguistic level, where they've acquired quite a bit of vocabulary, their listening skills are pretty good, their speaking skills still need to be worked on, but they're getting pretty good. They can say quite a bit, but we know what they can't do. So rather than just kind of throwing a discussion question out there, teaching them the phrases that they'll need to handle that type of discourse. It accommodates areas of interest, which I think is less an issue now for our department than it has been for departments in the past. We want to teach what the students want to know, and also what the TAs are interested in. So if some TA came to me and said, I want to teach in 10 weeks the poetry of Hölderlin, it would be saying, all right, you're not going to be able to do that as if you're teaching graduate students. We're going to have to cut that down and supplement that and do this in a way that is meaningful for the students and still gets you at your area of interest. So maybe we will teach poetry, and there's enough interesting things that the students won't actually groan and say, oh my God, it's poetry, I'll never do this. The one topic that's been tried, because people are interested in it, is the governmental system of Germany. And the students just are like, don't. Nobody can make that interesting enough to get the students to come to the table. Another thing that's been tried at this level, which seems like a great idea until you try it, and this is part of what learning is for us, fairy tales. They're going to be into it. It's the dysfunctional family. There's stuff out there. It's going to be great. And it was a matter of saying, yes, give this a try, and let's see why it isn't going to work at this level. the language is too complex, it's too colloquial, it's too embedded in a cultural context. And that person just had to say, all right, here was my plan, now I have to rip that apart and make a plan that will work for my students. And that's part of the learning process for the TA. The research. The research that has been done on this actually isn't bad. Pre and post tests show significant gains are made in the 4 skills: reading, writing, listening, and speaking, and vocabulary acquisition. This was done on a language that was not German, the research I'm citing here. And I wanted to point out that the research is solid. It's not just somebody anecdotally saying, hey, this worked for me. Students believe that they learn a great deal of the subject matter. That may not actually be true, but I do care about students believe that they learn, because then they want to take the next course and they're satisfied and they feel that they learned, and this is good. High degree of self-confidence and increased motivation. You can't argue with that. Especially, I think, for German, where after 2 years of German, if you ask people how fluent do you feel, second-year Spanish students tend to report, or French, that they're much more proficient in the language, where the Germans who've had it beaten into their head that this language is impossible, well, I'll never get there. They're defeated, and we need to show people at the end of the second year they're all equally competent or equally incompetent, no matter what they, that they're all hitting a level of they're just dangerous now. Potential benefits to TAs. It mirrors upper division instruction. They're going to go off and take their first job and teach a course like this in upper division, and they need the practice. They don't need to get at their first institution and phone me and say, how do I put together a syllabus? At this institution and many places, upper division teaching is not possible for graduate students. They're confined to lower division. So here we can do it in the lower division for them. We give them a practice run. This is something that when our TAs say that they've done this, it's not available at very many institutions for TAs, and so this makes that CV jump out of the pack. Great, they've cut their teeth. My new faculty member doesn't need to know how to pick a text for a 16-week course now. Somebody already taught him that. Looks good on the CV. It's continued development for the TA. When you've had them 3 or 4 years and they've taught first-year German, and they get one crack in our department at teaching the second year, and then they go, so they spend 4 or 5 years teaching first-year German, they're chomping at the bit. And so instead of going, the textbook really annoys me, in the first year, how can I expand, where can I grow? I've got a place for them to grow, which focuses their attention and gets them off noticing how what was exciting in the first year for them in year 1 or very difficult is now boring and inappropriate in year 4, because they know how to do that. It's a perk and it's a privilege, so it's something they can work hard and look forward to and get to do. Some of the things that coming into it, I've already talked about this, that I have to let them know that the topic has to be suited to a 10-week course, so that the poetry of Hölderlin is not going to work at that level. That's a graduate course topic. That's not going to work here. The amount of per reading per day that we do at this level is about 4 pages, where they're guided through 4 pages, not go home and read these 4 pages and come back and discuss. The TAs always select way too much reading and come in with way too much reading. Then I cut it and we negotiate, and there comes a point where that's it. I have to say, all right, you go with that. And then it's still too much. And they come back, and then they have to know how to cut from there. Am I going to summarize it? What am I going to do with this so that I get through this material, but my students aren't going to be able to read it? And then so they can learn those techniques, so if they were to make that mistake again, they would know how to handle it. But that's not a mistake I can preempt. That's one of these ones where they can only learn by making that mistake. They must assign homework. What will it be? What happens if you assign a homework where the students have to do something but nobody does it? What are you going to do with your class time when your class didn't help you prepare those activities, and how are you going to handle that? You have to didacticize the reading. I think the students think, okay, I've got my topic, I've got my syllabus, I've got my plan for homework. I know what I'm going to do with the essays. I know what I'm going to do for my exciting whiz-bang final. I've actually even didacticized my reading by asking them, giving them questions that they can do at home. Woohoo, I'm done, I'm ready to sail. But then they still have to prep class for every day. And they go, oh my God, this is a huge amount of work. Well, welcome to what faculty members do. This is the amount of work, this is what we do, these are the components. And that you can't just say, all right, you wrote these questions for homework about the text, let's discuss them. That you have to ramp up all your second year strategies for teaching meaning and having them create meaning from the text to do this. Okay, these TA responses are not students who are at Davis, and they never were. When this first got going, one TA responded, I had them keep logs back in the day when I started this, so I could find out what the pitfalls were and how this was going for them and where I needed to back off and where I needed to step in and say, it is so because I say so, and what not. Who would possibly be interested in doing all this extra work merely for the fun of designing one's own course? This person is no longer in the field. You know, if you're not willing to do the work that it takes, then you need to choose another career. My first reaction was very enthusiastic. I thought how great it would be to design my own course, to do topic-wise what I wanted to do, to select all the material, etc. This person completed her PhD and found a job in the field. So the responses can vary. Again, the syllabus design, follow university guidelines. They can get up to whatever they want. People have added an oral group project, significant lab time with collaborative writing and CMC, and then the blended discourse space of typing as a mode of communication or chat, plus the hollering that will go on in the room. Beautifully all in the target language, so they just do this for us. Oral presentations, student-created web pages, we've seen a lot of that, and that's where we then say we're not going to be using that block of final time. We have a different thing going. Theatrical production, short film, and you can see the time investment this is going to take on the part of the students to do all of these things, and we don't have any complaints about this was over the top or I had to spend money on my costume. We don't get any of that. We get people coming to the table and probably neglecting their other courses to do this. It must be clear how the students will be evaluated. That's another sticking point, that if you do any one of these exciting things, you have to have a task, a prompt for every essay and for every project that they're going to do, and a way that you're going to evaluate them that includes all categories, not like if you just did it, you get an A, but you know, what language component do you have to bring to the table, content, synthesis of what you've learned, etc. And TAs don't think that far in advance always. They're just like, I thought up the project. What? I have to evaluate it? Topic selection, again, must read a longer work. Can include short stories, nonfiction, drama, film, art, music, anything they want to get up to and can justify why this will be good is fine with me. Hopefully in the area of the interest of the TA. So the guy who did perfume, that's his area of interest. Film, contemporary literature, that's why that worked perfectly for him. What I don't want to see is to have a TA whose perhaps area of interest is film, or take this guy and then have them say, I'd like to do something on medieval literature. Why? Unless they've got a good reason why. I really love this and my life won't be complete unless I teach this particular text. That would be fine. Must be workable in a 10-week quarter. This means we are not going to come in with a Thomas Mann novel, Buddenbrooks, or War and Peace in Russian or something like that. Students at this level read about 4 pages a day. A lot of times there's negotiation about this. Readings have to be glossed. TA says, why can't they use the dictionary? No, you have to guide them or they're going to be looking up all the wrong words and this is a mess. And you have to teach them how to read because they can't read and understand every word. Questions to readings are helpful as homework. And those are pretty much a must. Daily activities designed to help students create meaning from the text, and then even though it's very small, copyright. The joys of getting through copyright and what we can and can't violate and what I won't violate. So heads up for the language coordinator. TAs have trouble finding a topic that will work, so you go through rounds of suggestions that you have to guide them to figuring out why that won't work and then coming up with something that will work. So if you have a TA who won't play ball and is missing deadlines and not having these discussions, I don't have a TA who's suited to doing this. They will assign too much reading and need to be shown how to work around the trouble they got themselves into. And this is not something I can dictate and say, just don't do this. It's something they have to learn by doing. This is a lot of work, and the TA doesn't understand how much it really is, even if they're absolutely willing to do a lot of work. It's always more work than they anticipated. This is not doing my job. This is preparing them to be faculty. And again, if I've got anyone who thinks that I should be doing this for them, I don't have somebody who's suited to be teaching this course. That's it.
Thank you very, very much, Carlee. Just very quickly, there are two, for me, major things here. The move from, in the area of learning, and from form to content, and then, of course, from a teaching situation for a TA, which consists of being given a syllabus and a structure and guided, and that's it, to taking the initiative. And with regard to the first, the move from more form to content, some of us, well, no, I guess I'm probably the only one here in the room, can remember the emphasis on form in language teaching years and years ago, and in exchanging notes with one of my colleagues, a French fellow professor who was in the school when he was in the 40s, the type of form that was given to you at that, on those occasions was absolutely and utterly ridiculous. You've got dialogues to learn in English of an old woman getting into the train in Paris on her way to Lyon, sits down in a compartment next to a young man, and she says, "I'm on the way to Lyon to visit my friend. And he says, "I do not care for spiders." She says, "Soup bothers me when it's cold." They had no context whatsoever, absolutely no context. They didn't coordinate anything at all with regard to that, to the type of thing that we're seeing nowadays, which is light years ahead in terms of your approach. But let's open it to questions from the floor. Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Carlee, you said this was intended for the fourth quarter?
Sixth quarter for us, fourth semester in a university and a semester system.
Sixth quarter.
Sixth quarter.
So could you feel you could push it back in German any further? Could it be in the fifth or the fourth, or what do you think about that?
I think what we should do for quarters 4 and 5 is we've got the standard package of a grammar where we don't go through the whole grammar beginning again. We do assume they learned something because they did. And short stories that go with it, which we prepare them to read, and any TA who's got some initiative is welcome to play in those courses as well. I think we would go to a reader of a variety of texts focusing on certain cultural issues, and that's the way to go for 20 and 21 for us.
You don't do that in Spanish?
Something like that.
Yeah, that's what we do too, for 4 and 5, which would be your 20 and 21.
Yeah, but we've been trying to work with the author of the textbook we use for the short stories to get a bigger range of stories and things that we can do with them. And I actually had a group of TAs who went to meet her at a conference ready to say, "Let us have the copyright, this is all wrong," and they're like, "She's such a nice old woman and so welcoming, and I see what she's getting at," and so, but that was, again, a learning thing for them. Yes? Did you have a question? No?
Something I'd like to actually ask of colleagues who are in different areas is, maybe Susan or Dawn, one of you could say something about this. How about TAs taking the initiative like this because this is directed towards language courses, but in areas that you're familiar with, or ecology? Could they do that? Would that be possible? I know it's structured differently, but is there any leeway for it?
Well, what you're suggesting is like foreign language across the curriculum, they call it FLAC.
No, I'm just talking about in their own areas,
Do
compared
we
to
let
what they're doing
students
now.
design their
To let
courses?
students
Do we let-
design a course, or design
Gotcha.
an aspect at least of the course that would be pretty much their own initiative.
We don't, it would be, I mean, in graduate, well, I guess in upper division courses, yes, but usually there's only like one section of that course, and so then the instructor just says, here, make a lab to go with this, or make a discussion to go with this, or find some papers that you think students could read and work on, and then they and the faculty member would meet and talk about those papers. But I think we need something in the middle between, I don't think we give them any training in terms of what a course is, in terms of how far back you have to stand to create a course. And I just did a little study writing to a bunch of graduate students who'd left here, who'd gotten jobs, and asked them what they were expected to do in their first year as professors.
Make
And,
courses.
well, worse than that, design labs, revise the curriculum. I mean, I was just reading this and going, what? And she says, yeah, I got here, they said, here, your new, revise the curriculum. And and then, you know, they would write me and say, I have no idea what to do. And I'm like, well, I'm not surprised. It didn't even occur to us that they would have to do things like that in their first year. And so, did you start this from that, did you ask people what does a first year professor have to do in German, or you knew that?
Well, I knew that because I'd been one, but my goal was how do I get increased streamlined articulation so that enrollments are just not falling apart.
Enrollments, and what do you mean by that?
That people come and take the first year of the language to meet the requirement and then don't continue on. How are we giving them enough of something so that they can see, they can envision themselves all the way through?
You mean the student
The
in
student.
the class, not the TA?
Right. It was for the retention of students. It's also, I cannot be putting my time was to train the TA in the 6 years or 5 years that they're with us. I do not want to answer a phone call about I don't know how to prepare my syllabus or switch textbooks or do whatever at their new institution. If they've paid attention in the years that they were with me, then they don't have those questions. They might call and ask because they want an opinion. That's a different thing. But I can't have people just having a prepared syllabus for their time here and then thinking that that's teaching when they go somewhere else.
There may be a structural parallel between what we do in foreign languages and what some of you folks do in the sciences with regard to the pattern, the repetitive pattern of doing the same thing. Every group of students that comes in, maybe it's helping with the lab or a discussion section or something like that, something that they would probably never do once they move to the assistant professor level. It's all left behind. And they may have even had a year or two in between as postdocs and aren't even really involved in that anymore too. But there's a gap. There is nothing as far as, and there hasn't been in many institutions for years, between, and it was even worse. Even when at one point students only taught the first year, and then the second, the third, and the fourth year or fifth year that they were here, they also taught the first year language. And then they moved from that right into a graduate course, an upper division course, maybe a couple of intermediate courses and so on at their first employment. And it's obviously something missing.
So what do they get paid 20 hours a week for being the TA, and then they get course credit for talking to you, or course
No,
credit
that's
for
their
these
job.
group meetings or anything
Nope,
else?
that's their
In the
job.
first year, they take that's
They
$396.
take a methods
take a course.
and they get a course.
And
Which
they
is
get credit for
$291
that.
and they get credit for that, but that's the last coursework credit that they get.
And even if you wanted to make any more, your department wouldn't let
It's
you.
funding something.
Yeah, it's not that my department or any department wouldn't welcome this, it's that folks would say this is now detracting from the however many courses that they get to take between BA and MA. You're devoting then a third of this to,
Is graduate work a lot of courses?
it's 2 courses per quarter plus teaching. So if they take 6 in a year, so that's 12 over 2 years, I've got 1/6 of this going to what people see as just professionalization or something they should know how to do because they were born knowing or whatever.
And so when do they do their research on top of that? or they don't have to do, they do
Oh, yeah.
research.
Yeah.
Yeah, you asked about the situation in sciences. I am from chemistry, so I can tell you this. What is happening is pretty sad. And why it is sad is most students TA the first year they are here. One, lot of them are have language problems. It's international. This is saying nothing bad about people from outside. I was born outside, so I can say this. They don't know how to speak and they have a hard time dealing with students. And that's pretty much the time when they are told to TA. So when you say, can you put any of them in charge of the courses, for heaven's sake, no, they couldn't. Okay, so they do the bare minimum needed, and then faculty members have selfish interest, that is, you want to get these students into their labs, producing some results for them, so they can publish and get promoted or tenure or whatever. And so if you have any funding, you put the good students onto research projects supported by SRAs. So all the good ones get moved away from teaching. So as they get even some teaching training, then they are not available to use their training in good teaching. And this is why I say it's a sad state of affairs. Does anybody care? No.
So
unless they run out of money at the end of the fourth year or so.
The teaching resources centers
and
theirs.
TA-ship is there to
Yeah.
finish them out
Yeah,
fifth
but
year.
even at that time,
Not
their
too many
main
of
goal
them.
is to finish the thesis, right? Because they want to get
course.
that done. So they do the bare minimum needed.
So
Okay, I mean, I had students assigned to TA my upper division courses who could not even score in single digits in the exam that I am giving to my students. Okay, and unions stand in the way because I can't dismiss them. There were occasions where I have told them to go and stay home and I will teach the lab.
I mean, in biology, it's not that bad, I mean, at all. We have TA training once a week for every single lab for sometimes as many hours as it takes to get you ready, and we have a coordinator who's in charge of that. What we did before with our old course was use training DVDs, which was excellent for a lot of the content stuff. So they could watch the content at home, and you could spend more time in the training sessions on pedagogy, right? How do you teach? What, okay, now you know what you're supposed to cover. Let's talk about how many ways you could get a discussion going. So we had some of that for our old course. We haven't got that back for our new one. And we get people coming back, 8 or 10 or 12 times. And it can be an easy living because we are hiring at least 15 people per course every quarter. So there's that, but I don't think we have that second level with any training associated with it. You might just be with some professor who say, discussion's your baby, figure something out.
But it does seem like in the sciences, it has to be something someone wants to own. So Susan, you're interested in owning it in the science, in biology. I know that there are some people in physics. And I've heard, Krishnan, you are not the first person I've heard saying, wow, chemistry is really suffering because people don't own it and it is treated like a non-skill. Like I think you just said, at best they think of it as professionalization, and at worst they think of it as something you're born knowing how to do. And I think that that's
Or
really
that it
common
takes
in
no
a
skill
lot of
to
things.
do it.
Right,
Yeah,
that
anybody
is
could do it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
right.
is an issue.
You can teach.
Huge issue.
So it's a cultural shift that I think
Absolutely.
we might be talking about in all of our fields.
And plus, professionally at the university level, the really good language instructors get lecturer positions. They don't get in the tenure track positions. So until the universities.
That's actually, we're not finding that of our people coming out. We're
Well,
seeing
that's
that.
what I saw when I was in graduate school at Berkeley, was that all the really good language instructors were lecturers and they had yearly appointments.
Oh, you mean at the
I'm talking
institution?
about
Yeah,
Okay.
institution
Right, I'm
already.
talking institutionally.
They
The
can't-
Yes.
Yes.
academy doesn't value,
Unfortunately,
it's
that's for sure.
it's make do work for,
I agree.
I'm sorry, I come out of the same background,
Oh,
so I
right.
know what I'm talking about. I mean,
Yes.
It's make do work for graduate students. If they're native speakers, all the better. But ultimately,
Right.
the institution doesn't value it.
And so, can't your TAs, run the language table and study abroad fair and undergraduate fair and do picnic day and the 21 other things that get dumped on my desk because I'm a glorified secretary. I mean, my department does not treat me that way.
Yes.
I mean, please
Indeed.
don't. And they never have from the day I walked on this campus. So don't think that. But that's just what comes with the job. Well, couldn't Carlee teach a 6th course? I mean, it's not from my department, from other areas. Because, well, why not? That's what she does.
But there is an attitude, I'm afraid, in any number of instances in the 32 years that I've been here, which is not simply an administrative attitude, but faculty attitude that does prevail. It's fortunately in the minority, but it is there. And if those people have a voice that's of any significance within a unit, it could be decisive.
And I find that RTA is going out, that there's no room anymore for somebody who just wants to do research. You have got to be a good classroom teacher and know what you're talking about, not just be popular or whatever else people think might come with that. You have to really know how to do it.
Does that affect your tenure here in languages now? So if you
Yes.
were a lousy teacher and a good researcher, would they hold it against you?
I think for new
Depends on the
people,
institution.
yeah. Depends on the institution. I wouldn't risk it though.
Yeah, but that's a good sign in a way. I mean, because that's the feedback loop that is going to help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are cases like that, and even higher up where the research is excellent, but the teaching has been pretty bad. I've seen
But-
one person held up for 3 years.
But wouldn't you say that in general, teaching, in general in the country, teaching only plays a role if it is negative? If teaching is good, then research is.
It's just good. I know when I wrote my
negative,
first,
it can be.
when I wrote my
Right.
first teaching philosophy, I'm talking about how I use collaborative writing, and I have all the citations in there. That to me was what that meant, and everyone's like, oh, well, you don't really need all that. Well, then what distinguishes my informed classroom teaching from somebody who's just a good teacher because they have gut instincts or whatever?
So do you go in and evaluate the TAs, Carlee?
Yep.
So you
Yep.
write a little form out and
So
say this
by
guy.
the time I do the 23 observations that I have on my own roster, which take 3 hours apiece, plus whatever else I do for education and other departments, we've sucked a good portion of my time.
Talking about time,
Yeah.
we
That's too bad.
have to call an end to it. Thank you again, Carlee.
Thank you
Thank
so
you all
much.
for coming. And hope to see you next week when the real master of ceremonies will be back. It's very difficult to follow Andy Jones. In fact, he's got that Ed McMahon way about him. Here's Andy, and he should be back next Friday.
But I should say we enjoyed having you here.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Does that make you Johnny Carson?